Happening today in Virginia Beach, a man accused of decapitating his own 5-year-old son is set to go before a judge again.
Joseph Hagerman's not guilty by reason of insanity plea is under review this morning. And you may remember that Hagerman was arrested in 2009, accused of killing his son and slashing his wife. Last year, a judge granted him conditional release.
So Elise Brown is outside of the courthouse in Virginia Beach. And Elise, what is next in this very hard to forget case?
Good morning, Lucy and Ashley. According to law in Virginia, insanity cases like Hagerman's are reviewed every year or every other year. Hagerman is under daily supervision for the majority of the week. He lives with an adult foster family where he's under 24-hour supervision. He's also given his medicine for schizophrenia. Then he gets to spend weekends with family. Back in 2009, police accused Hagerman of decapitating his 5-year-old son. Judge A. Bonwell Shockley decided to grant Hagerman a conditional release. This after health professionals testified in his favor, calling him a model patient. However, prosecution opposed that decision. Now, last year in court, the judge Shockley said he prays he's done the right thing by granting the release. We'll continue to follow the story and keep you updated on what happens in court today. Live in Virginia Beach, Elise Brown, 13 News Now.